to go? And everybody can hear me okay? Yep. Perfect. Okay, welcome everybody, and I will call the meeting to order. It's 10:01. Climate Action Committee, July 21st. And here comes Dr. Anderson. Welcome.
John?
Yeah, here's good, or wherever you're comfortable. Yeah, perfect. All right. I'll begin by reading the land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabeg, the people of the Three Fires, known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all as treaty people live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples. Okay, so everyone's had a chance to look at the agenda. Are there any proposed changes, additions to the agenda? Seeing none. Can someone, Anne, go ahead, or are you going to move that we approve the agenda?
Just a question, and I don't see Brittany here today, is that right?
Correct.
Right, okay.
No, I'm here.
I'm sorry.
Brittany, don't have my video on.
My glasses don't allow me really to see that far to the screen, so if you're here, Brittany, my apologies.
Brittany is participating virtually,
Awesome.
Madam Chair.
I just wondered whether it would make sense to do a little bit of an update on GB Goes Green towards the end of the meeting.
Yeah. Is that okay with you, Britt?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so I'll just...
To accept.
I'm sorry, you'll move?
Sure.
With that addition? Okay, all
Yep.
in favor? And that carries. Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting of June 16th, 2022. Do I have someone to move that those minutes be approved? Thank you, Member Carlton. And are there any is there any discussion regarding those minutes? Go ahead, Danuta. Yep.
Sorry, I still have to find my hand on this. When I read the minutes, under section 10.1, it talks about committee discussion about the PCP. And it should be BARC, Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities, we were talking about in that section. And that's important because there's a big difference.
Okay, so that is on page 3, 10.1, and you're suggesting that it should be BARC instead of PCP in that last paragraph.
It was BARC. I think I raised that issue, and it was about the fact that we have a membership with BARC, but we haven't utilized it.
Okay, good comments. So we can have that amendment made. Thank you. And it pleases me to hear that somebody's actually reviewing the minutes of previous meetings. Thank you, Danuta. And Anne, you go ahead.
Yeah, and actually the same in 10.1. I think the decision was reached at that meeting after tabling the work plan that committee members would review the work plan over this past month and come back to table today to kind of determine whether it was going to be used and moved forward.
Okay, so that was part of, I'm sorry, I wasn't at the meeting, so
that's my memory, that the work plan was tabled. There was not in-depth discussion. It was agreed that we would all look at it and then come to table this month to determine whether we were okay with it and whether we were going to use it.
Okay, I think that's probably another worthwhile addition to that set of minutes then, or changes, if that's okay. along with the PCP to BARC. Carly, is that something that can be done on the fly? Or? Perfect. Thank you, Anne. And over to you, CAO Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do recall that we need to have discussion about the work plan. I wonder if the committee would be amenable, though. We have quite a full agenda today with 2 presentations, and we are about to bring on a new staff member who will be sort of quarterbacking the work plan with this committee. I recognize that we want to endorse the work plan as quickly as possible, but it seems that it would be a good idea to include the new staff member in that discussion at a future meeting. Thank you.
Okay, does that sound agreeable to the rest of committee? If we defer that addition to the agenda to the next meeting, I'm seeing thumbs up, so thank you. We will go ahead and do that. Okay, so with the 2 changes made to item 10.1 on the last set of minutes, do I have someone who would approve given those 2 changes will be made? Thank you, Danuta. Any further discussion? All in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right. As always, if you have a pecuniary interest to declare, do so now if you're aware or at any point in time during the meeting. We have no delegations that I'm aware of. And so on, I'm sorry? Yeah. Oh, that's under delegations. Okay. Oh, I see that now. Thank you. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong page of my agenda. Yes, we have 2 delegations. So first of all, I would like to welcome Linda Swanston from the County of Grey. I believe Linda is their Climate Action Coordinator, and she's here to give us an overview of Going Green in Grey and their climate action plan at the county level. I'm sorry, Manager of Climate Change Initiatives. And I believe Randy Schertzer is also here, Deputy CAO. And I will welcome those 2 folks from the county and turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. So it's just myself, Linda Swanston, with you this morning, but certainly if there's any questions that arise from the presentation that require additional comment, I can seek that and report back. So thank you so much for the invitation to join you this morning. I know I've had the opportunity to present to you a number of times previously, and the presentation I'm going to share today is the same material that myself and Randy presented to Georgian Bluffs Council on July 6th. So because I am well aware of many of your familiarity with the content, I'm going to move relatively quickly through some of the pieces that I know we've discussed before, and really focus in on the county's planned next steps, and then certainly happy to respond to any questions at the end. Let me just share my screen here. So one new thing is we do have a new title. I think the last time I spoke with you, I had the mouthful of Grey County's Climate Change Action Plan, and we were pleased that when we took this plan to County Council back at the very end of April, they were supportive of naming the plan Going Green in Grey, or G3. So that's what I'm going to provide a bit of an update on today. This material I'm just speaking to in that I hope it's a useful resource to you. So this is these are statistics specifically about Grey, Bruce, and Huron counties that were provided by the Climate Risk Institute. So they've kind of downscaled some provincial and national data to say what we might anticipate locally in this area. Obviously, with the headlines at the moment in Europe and the UK, things like the fact we should anticipate by 2050 20 more hot days, so 20 more 30-degree-plus days by 2050 locally, I think is something we need to be very aware of, and also the prediction that rainstorms or heavy extreme precipitation events will be twice as frequent by 2050 locally. So hopefully this may be useful as you're speaking to others about what we might anticipate if we don't take action. The PCP milestone framework, as you all know, is provided in partnership between ICLEI Canada and Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Much like the proposed Township of Georgian Bluffs plan, the county's plan does follow this 5 milestone process, and the Going Green and Grey document that has now been adopted covers the first 3 milestones, or as I say, we've now arrived at the starting line. And so steps 4 and 5 of implementation and monitoring are still to be undertaken. I believe that I have spoken about the engagement that went into this plan previously with this table, but this is a summary of really the conversations that were had over the last almost 2 years that informed this plan. And the main thing I like to say here is if anyone has the misconception that this Going Green and Grey is the fruit of myself or even a handful of Grey County staff, sort of sitting in a room and thinking, oh, what should we do? That very much was not the approach that the county took. We really sought to receive feedback as broadly as possible. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, influenced the ways in which we solicited feedback. It was primarily online, but we did host, there was an online survey prior to myself joining the county, and then we also held a number of online workshops and meetings. The first line on this slide just speaks to some of the advisory tables that informed the plan. So one is the Climate Change Task Force, which is a subcommittee of County Council. So it's elected officials who sort of provided strategic direction. And then we also had internal and external working groups that informed what we were doing. The engagement findings were, multiple, but we did in a report to the Climate Change Task Force in December, distill them down into sort of 11 key recommendations. And I won't go through all of them, but I think the first few are worth note. So one was we heard in almost every comment we received the need to set net zero targets. There was a real desire to see an alignment of the county's targets with the federal targets and also international science-based guidance. This strong emphasis on the opportunities that Grey County's landscape provides in terms of nature-based solutions through both afforestation and agricultural practices. That said, recognizing, given the breadth of actions proposed in the plan, a desire to see a prioritization of where we should start, and then also a recognition that the plan is a living document. So between now and 2050, things are going to change. And so there is, as part of the Going Green and Grey plan, an update schedule where with every term of council, an updated plan will be presented, kind of that responds to progress that has been made or new technologies that may have emerged. So based on those findings and also the technical modeling provided by ICLEI Canada, our consultant, this was a set of targets that were approved by County Council. And it was actually County Council that asked us to include, or sorry, the Climate Change Task Force, which asked us to include these mile markers. So initially we had the plan proposed a 2030 and a 2050 target, and we welcomed the feedback that there was a desire to have these interim goals. So we're able to kind of take stock along the way to see how things are going. The other thing that was requested of us as staff was to accelerate the corporate target. So if the intent is for the community as a whole to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, we were asked to lead by example and achieve that same reduction by 2045. In the community space, there are 21 actions in Going Green and Gray, so it's still quite comprehensive. And those actions are across 7 themes, and it really, touches everything from those nature-based solutions through to transportation, buildings, certain engagement activities. So taking to heart that advice to us to prioritize, we looked at all of these actions, and we sort of establish some criteria for how we might prioritize. So the first criteria was around emissions reduction potential. And so what you see on this slide, and this is all within the plan itself and available online, is ICLEI Canada was able to estimate for us with the best available data what the reduction potential of each action would offer. And I think there's a few messages here. So one is, there's no magic bullet, there's no single thing we can do that's going to achieve the level of reduction that we need. It really is kind of a cross-sectoral change and recalibration that we need. And there are some areas, for example, the first sort of 3 are all connected to buildings. This yellow wedge is related to zero emissions or electric mobility and transportation. And then these brown wedges are connected to agricultural opportunities. So really it sort of helped guide us where there was sort of these bigger opportunities for reductions. The other criteria we looked at was cost. What's the opportunity, what's going to be the return on investment of these different activities, particularly if there's an activity that is perhaps requires a significant investment but doesn't yield a particularly great reduction, maybe that's not the place to start. The third criteria was around community benefit. So is there going to be benefits beyond just emission reduction associated with an activity? So is there job creation potential for some of those building activities? Is there the opportunity to address energy poverty? Are we able to reduce the utility bills of our residents and businesses? And then the fourth and final criteria was, where does the county have an opportunity to leverage change? If it's an area of policy that's really solidly held with another level of government, again, perhaps it's not the place for the county to start. We can certainly articulate what our ambitions are and what our priorities are, but looking at that, where is that leverage? So based on those 4 criteria, we identified a few priority area actions. So the first were these 4 foundational pillars. And so these are actions that are already in some way underway, either by the county ourselves or by other actors. So action 1 within the plan, which is afforestation, habitat and wetland protection. The local conservation authorities are already active in this area. So the intent of Going Green and Gray would be to support and, if possible, expand some of those existing activities. Similarly, in terms of capacity building for agricultural decarbonization, which has to be the least public-friendly action title I can think of, there's an opportunity to support organizations like Gray Ag Services that already offer courses and programming to local farmers around best management practices for carbon sequestration in soil or manure management. Expanding waste and organic diversion. So again, there's already across the county various waste management programs. So how can we at the county level support municipalities in expanding those programs or increasing the efficacy of those programs? And then finally, the county's OP already identifies the importance of compact mixed-use development. So making sure that remains a priority in development going forward. So by continuing and expanding those 4 foundational pillars, they together can achieve almost 40% of our cumulative, those wedges, almost 40% of the cumulative emissions to 2050 are achieved by continuing and expanding these 4 pillars. Building on those 4 foundational pillars, the plan also identifies 5 key next steps. So these are either brand new programs that the county is seeking to initiate, or perhaps things that have already started to some degree, but that are a priority moving forward. So the first is to work with local municipalities around the creation of a green development standard. There's certainly precedent from other municipalities of various sizes of asking and incenting, and in some instances requiring new construction to achieve a higher environmental performance level. So that's one of the priorities. The second is to catalyze a residential retrofit program. I can say that one thing that has changed in the last few months is that the long-awaited federal Greener Homes program has announced their zero interest loans. So NRCan has been speaking for years about the fact that they will be offering zero interest home retrofit loans, and that was announced in the last couple of months. So certainly what a residential retrofit program looks like in that context has shifted a little bit, but it remains a priority to support residents in improving the efficiency of their homes. The third is to accelerate zero emissions transportation, which in our landscape, where people are traveling longer distances, certainly includes a strong emphasis on electric vehicles, but also includes anything that supports active transportation, such as walking or cycling, or the use of public transit. And then one of the fourth next step is to develop a climate adaptation plan. And this is certainly something we'll be looking to the Township of Georgian Bluffs and others who are actually, I think, further along this path than the county by integrating both adaptation and mitigation into their initial work. So the county will also be looking to create an adaptation plan in the near-term future. And then the final priority is around climate action engagement. So similarly, we know there's fantastic programming happening in many of the local municipalities around carbon footprinting and getting residents active on this. So at the county level, we'll be looking to support programs that already exist, and perhaps in some of the municipalities who've not yet initiated climate action engagement, trying to get them to learn from best practices from some of their peers. And together, those 5 key next steps achieve, again, almost 40%. So basically, between those 9 actions, that's 80% of our emission reduction. So my final slide is just, I guess, a bit of a snapshot of when we are successful doing all of this, what will we achieve? So the first one is an 84% emissions reduction from that 2018 baseline. And of course, you know, I showed you that net zero target earlier, and I'm showing you an 84% now. They're not the same. And the expectation is that hopefully the improvements in technology over the next 30 odd years will allow us to close that gap. But in addition to the emissions reduction, the 21 actions identified also achieve a 61% energy consumption reduction. So I think it's important to emphasize that while fuel switching to low carbon fuels is critical, we're also talking about a more efficient community where we're using less energy, which has benefits beyond just greenhouse gas reductions. One of which, this 41% reduction in energy cost savings across the community. So what this modeling estimates is, you know, when we are successful in supporting these home energy retrofits and the transition to electric vehicles, that our residents and businesses will actually, between now and 2050, be saving almost $2.5 billion on fuel costs, which is really significant. So I just want to emphasize that there's many benefits to a sort of lower carbon sustainable future, as well as the vital one of avoiding those worst impacts of climate change. So with that, I'll thank you for your time and happy to try and respond to any questions.
Thank you, Linda. That's an excellent overview of what's happening at the county level. It's encouraging as well. So I'll just open up the floor for committee members if there are any questions or comments. Is that Luke? Hi, Luke. You go ahead, and then we'll go to Danuta.
Thanks, Patty. And thanks, Linda, for the presentation. I really enjoyed when I saw the presentation as part of the slide pack. I thought it was very informative. 2 questions from my side. One is maybe a little bit out of, goes back to the engagement piece and what we can learn from the engagement effort that you went through. I just wondered if there is any group that was left out or was not involved. I see that one of your priority areas, and of course, I'm kind of thinking about one group that we talk fairly often about in this group, is the agricultural sector. And I see that one of your pillars is the agricultural sector. But at the same time, of course, it also raises, I don't know what the mandate is of the county to actually directly engage with representatives. But I wonder if that group was involved and what we could learn from your efforts in terms of what kind of concerns of pushback or support was there for the plan. And then my second question is, when I read your plans and before as well, maybe you could specify who is going to implement this plan. What is the county doing? What do you expect from the municipalities and others? So that we have a bit of a, so that if people say, well, you know, we don't have to worry about it because the county has thought about it, that we can say, well, the country has limited resources as well, and this is actually a plan that is supposed to be implemented by many people. This is not what the county can do. It's facilitating the framework and providing the framework. So if you could provide some insights on that, that would be great.
Thank you for the question. So through the chair, with regards to the first question around agricultural community engagement, I think one of the things that Going Green and Grey really tries to emphasize is that the agricultural community is already doing great stewardship work in many instances and is an essential part of any climate solutions going forward. I think there's, often these, and I have them, they're not in this presentation, but they've been in other presentations, pie charts, which show where emissions come from across Grey County. And there's a big wedge that's connected to the agricultural community. And I think that there's a few things to say on that, which are important in engagement efforts. So one, recognizing that we do all need to eat. There's certainly some areas of emissions which are discretionary, where there's perhaps opportunities to reduce or to, change production methods. And similarly, there are opportunities to modify production methods in the agricultural sector, but those are not discretionary emissions. Having a effective food system is something we all depend on. And also those emissions are not all of the food products are being consumed in Grey County. Those emissions are connected to all of the food that we produce, much of it consumed elsewhere. In terms of agricultural engagement, we did hear, and this was sort of early on, so prior to me joining the county, but certainly it continued in the engagement that I was part of facilitating. But we did offer a targeted agricultural online survey because we heard with the initial general public online survey that it perhaps didn't capture the priorities of the agricultural community. So we did receive 38 responses to that agricultural survey. And Hiba Hussein, who was my predecessor, she also attended a number of specific agricultural, organizations meetings to talk about the plan and receive comments. The county, in addition to the Climate Change Task Force, also has an agricultural advisory committee. And so that was my main point of contact in developing the plan, was to kind of put proposals in front of them and receive their feedback and advice. There's always an opportunity to do more. And I think that is part of that priority around working with the agricultural community, is to really seek their feedback on the specifics of any program design. But I will just quickly highlight that is one of the areas where, in terms of policy, it's well outside of municipal jurisdiction. We're not looking to do that. We're really looking to say, okay, organizations like Alternative Land Use Services that work so well already in the community, how can we support their offerings? So I think definitely ensuring there's targeted engagement with the agricultural sector is important, and it's something that's ongoing through implementation. And then in terms of implementation, you're absolutely right. This is a framework, it's a plan, and it can only be successful with efforts from all orders of government. So certainly some of the funding for many of these initiatives will need to flow from the federal and provincial governments. It can't be carried exclusively on the property tax base. It's not realistic. And also things like a green development standard tend to be implemented at the municipal level through things like site plan approval. It's not something that the county is going to be able to implement directly, but we would work with local municipalities in the development of any standard or program, and then that implementation would fall to each local municipality as an example.
Does that answer your questions, Luke? Luke did ask one question, Linda. Were there any groups that were not consulted and in hindsight maybe should have been? Did you experience that at all?
Thank you for that reminder. So I think there certainly was efforts made throughout the process to connect with local Indigenous communities and leaders. And that work is so dependent on relationships that I think where the Going Green and Grey plan landed was the real vital importance of, in implementing each action, connecting and engaging with Indigenous community early to make sure that something like a green development standard considers traditional Indigenous knowledges as well as Western sciences and so forth. And then other groups that perhaps could have been better engaged. I mean, from the limited demographic data that we were able to collect from participants, we did see that the average age of many of the respondents to our surveys and participants to our online engagement sessions was skewed slightly older than the demographic average across the county, which is not unusual for engagement. So I would say similarly, there's a recognition of the need to really have some targeted youth engagement, especially as this is an issue so important to our young people.
Excellent. That's all. Yeah, really useful information. Thank you, Linda. Danuta.
I had my hand, I put my hand up a bit late because Luke, you asked two excellent questions. Mine was more of a comment because there was a silence after your presentation ended. I think it's great. I just wanted to say I found that very helpful to hear you talk through it, although I did look at it. It sets up a kind of framework which would, and also knowing that these resources are available to us, I think it's good to see it in that light. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne, over to you, and then John.
I want to thank Linda as well. I thought it was an excellent overview of the work that's gone down over the last number of years. Two comments. One, with the retrofit loans that are in place and other kinds of things like that, I think one way that we could work together really well is to simplify processes for constituents. Because I know we're going through that right now, and it's a pretty complicated process. So anything that could be done to simplify that would be really helpful. The other comment, and it's a constituent group that I'm not sure has been targeted, but I think could be really, really helpful around more community engagement, is the artist community. They have some really good skills of pulling people in, whether it's visually through music, and I think they could be really, really helpful in furthering the engagement process, and particularly with youth.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that's really thinking outside the box. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of getting the word out there and encouraging people to become involved. Thanks, Anne. John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just echoing the others, yeah, great plan, Linda. We're really proud of this Grey County Climate Action Plan. And my question, I think it's going to follow directly from what Anne just said, because you mentioned public engagement as one of your priority areas and how important it is. And you commented the number of initiatives going on already at community levels, like the Carbon Footprint Challenge, the Carbon Conversations, and the Bicycle Challenge. And now Anne has given you a great suggestion at the county level, but my question was, what are your ideas for public engagement at the county level?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. There's so many options. We're spoiled for choice. So certainly one of the things we're looking to do, which is kind of the simplest, is just there's already a web page that the county set up, but to really expand that to provide more information about programs, perhaps link to will definitely link to the sustainability map that the 519 Sustainability Project has put together to be able to showcase many of the events that are going on. Some of the things that we're exploring, in some communities, there's support from the municipality, or in this case, the county, for almost an arm's length agency that focuses on climate community engagement. One example is the London Environmental Network in London, Ontario. There's certainly many others. So really recognizing that residents are probably going to be the best position to engage other residents. So what are some potential structures or mechanisms to support that? Another thing that's already underway and moving forward at a steady pace is the county was successful in an application to ICLEI's Agents of Change program, which is specifically around trying to seed municipally, and again, in this case, county-led climate volunteer programs. So getting residents out and active in the community, taking climate action. And so as an initial piece, we're looking at trying to work with local Indigenous community with a kind of focus on reconciliation. It's Mawikwadong Indigenous Friendship Center in Owen Sound that sort of partnered with us on the application to look at if there's ways to learn from Indigenous approaches to land stewardship to be in better relationship, both with our natural environment and also with each other as treaty peoples. And so really seeing there if there's a role for the county to play in again, I guess, supporting volunteer programming that has that reconciliation emphasis. I would say on that one, like so many of these, we are just getting started, but I warmly welcome advice and suggestions. So I think the arts community suggestion is one I'll definitely take away with me. And certainly anyone at any time can feel free to reach out if you have ideas on what might work well around this piece.
Good. Thank you, Linda. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Sue.
Just a comment on page 8 of your presentation, Linda, but the emissions reduction of community actions. It really surprises me to see on there that active transportation seems to almost fade out when we hit 2040. And I guess I would have thought that it would be expanding at that time. So is there a reason or a thought process behind why that line just kind of withers away to nothing? And thank you for being here today, Linda.
Through you, Madam Chair. So good eyes, number one. So that's that thin red wedge on slide 8. So active transportation. So the target set in the county's plan around active transportation, I'm going to have to look it up, but it's really around short trips. We tried to be realistic in recognizing that many trips in Grey County are not short trips, and it's not realistic to expect someone to be bicycling. Some people will, but by and large, to be bicycling, 30 kilometers to work each day. So I believe from just a technical perspective, the reason that wedge kind of whittles away to nothing is that by 2041, the assumption is that the vast majority of cars are electric. So if the shift is from an electric car to active transportation, there's certainly public health benefits to getting more people walking and cycling, but the emissions reduction benefits sort of disappear if someone's, instead of getting into an electric car, getting onto their bike. But I think, and I will look it up because I think it's worth noting, that one of the targets that was set in Going Green and Gray was this idea that over time, our short trips would become active. So the target is that by 2030, 25% of short trips are made by active transportation, and that by 2050, 40%, so almost half of our short trips are made by active modes. And those are the kind of targets that we can keep in mind as we're making decisions about infrastructure. Are we building the infrastructure needed for residents to be able to make those short trips? And also, are we developing in a way where things are close enough that there are short trips to be made? So thank you for that question.
Yeah, no, that's an important one, and it's the active transportation piece is near and dear to my heart. And I think it ties back to the municipal work we need to do in planning for things like roads as well. I only live 6 kilometers from this building, and I'd love to cycle here, but cycling on the bypass is terrifying. And it's, in my opinion, not safe. So we need to start building those thoughts into the infrastructure and the planning for roads as well. Yeah, so thank you. Who had their hand up next? Luke?
Yeah, just a quick comment. It's a really nice conversation, and I can't help but think that maybe it would be worthwhile to do a bit of an exercise. I just couldn't help but think about a Venn diagram, the 2 overlapping circles, and to see what does the county do and what can we do on a municipal level. And I'm just the Green Development Standard. On the county side you have something, but then Linda, you said the municipality needs to integrate it. So where's that overlapping circle where we can actually work together? You have the engagement plan on the county side, and Anne comes up with the idea of, well, we can collaborate with the artist in our municipality. Where can we collaborate in that space? The retrofit exercise could the county provide information in terms of how it works in a municipality, have a network of volunteers who could actually explain how it works in practice because they have gone through it. And I wonder if there's opportunities where you have that overlap. And I think it would be worthwhile, because that then could actually feed into the work plan of this committee to say, these are actually priority areas that are already underway. How can we tap into that rather than to reinvent the wheel? So it's more a comment that, or to think of that at some point in the future, that may be a worthwhile exercise.
Mm-hmm. Linda, do you have any comments about that? Would you agree that, delineating responsibilities in that way might be helpful?
Thank you for the comment and question. I will always say yes to the offer of help. And yes, I think they're probably on almost an activity by activity basis. It will be one of the things I'll be doing that will be really useful to do in conversation is exactly that. Particularly the ones that are sort of already, I guess, moving are that green development standard, sort of starting to engage local municipalities on that piece, and also the home retrofits are 2 programs where definitely, and the engagement, those 3, there'll be clear collaboration.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Anne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to Linda and Sue's comment regarding active transportation, if e-bikes were added to the mix of active transportation and electric vehicles, then the distances are not quite so onerous. And I think that we're seeing more of them, so I think it's worth considering.
Yeah, also a good point. Do we have any data on that, Linda, at the county level on the use of e-bikes?
Through you, Madam Chair, at this time, no. But absolutely, it is an area that's been identified. I know it was the Collingwood Climate Action team that did a e-bike and e-vehicle kind of demo. I was going to call it a meet and greet, but that's not quite it. But sort of having them available for residents to look at and the e-bikes to try. And I think getting as many people on an e-bike just to experience how much it does open up distances is a great idea. And collecting better data on that going forward is also needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. All good ideas. Any other questions or comments for Linda from committee? Looks like that's it. Thank you again, Linda. It's always helpful to have you here. And we have asked Linda to stay and hear the Wood consulting report, and as some of the questions and comments may tie back to the county plan as well. So thank you for agreeing to stay on, Linda. I don't believe I have a name to introduce the consulting company, the consulting firm who will be presenting. So apologies. Maybe I'll just turn it over to Madam CAO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe we have Brian Montgomery from Wood Consulting here to offer the presentation to committee today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so welcome, Mr. Montgomery, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do I need to share my screen, or will we be going through your live stream on the presentation? Just clarifying, I can share my screen if that makes it easier for everybody.
I think that's likely the way, but I'll ask our Deputy Clerk, Carly. Your preference, Brian.
All right, let me take control. Might be easier to go through. All right, good morning, everybody. It's good to be back again to see all your familiar faces and some new faces. I am Brian Montgomery. I am the Climate Change, Resiliency, and Sustainability Specialist at Wood. Just some background, just to familiarize yourselves. It's been a couple months. Our apologies, but the scope of the work was Wood was retained by the Township of Georgian Bluffs to look at development of a corporate climate change action plan. But the bulk of our focus has been on the corporate assets of the township. So we are looking at adaptation. We are also looking at mitigation. Adaptation being what are the climate risks for weather impacts for the assets of the township corporately, and also looking at the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from corporate assets. The first slide is just to give you an update on where we are in terms of the actual risk assessment. So this may be familiar from the last presentation. This is looking at the corporate assets of the townships, looking at the water system, the road network, building and facilities of the township. So everything from the community center to the interdepartmental fire, the bridges and culverts. Now, you also know on the slide that there are machinery and equipment assets, there are vehicle assets, and there's land improvements. The machinery and equipment and the vehicle assets, we are looking at that from a greenhouse gas reduction viewpoint. And from the land improvements, that actually on a community is actually in the community side when it comes to decision-making actions, but it is something that could be integrated into the community official plan of the township. Looking at the building and facilities, I will break this down into what we are examining, and I will explain the process. For the assets review, this is based on the buildings and facilities of the data that is available. So looking at the buildings, and the township has done building condition reports. These look at what the condition of the buildings are from a foundation point of view, but also from a structural point of view. We are looking at, the list is there. We're looking at the actual administration office all the way to the road shops and the community centers and the water treatment plants. Our data sources from this have been also, we've located where these sources are and looking at the building conditions themselves. Key ones are water treatment plants and community centers, not only from the function that they serve for the operations and an asset that the township owns, but also that is where people are dependent on those types of services. So there is a bit of an emergency preparedness element to this as well in our risk assessments. The road shops are included because that is where vehicles are located, but it's also where stuff like plows for wintertime are there, as well as the equipment that may be used by the township, as well as your salt storage. So for salting of roads in the wintertime. So we are looking at this from the what facilities are owned and operated by the township corporately, because it also ties into the asset management plan that the township itself is required by the province of Ontario to report back on as well. As the other reason why we've chosen these as the assets is these have been reported to the province through the energy reporting system. So energy data is available. And this is why these assets are tied from a risk point of view, but also these are the assets I've looked at from an energy viewpoint for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Assets that are not a physical facility or a building. So the water systems, we are looking at the water treatment plants, obviously, but we're also looking at the connected sites and the service areas of water distribution. That's not only just the water treatment side, but also the water delivery, so potable water. We are looking at bridges and culverts. There are many of them in the township. The reason for that is they obviously connect to the roadway system and the road network. We're looking at locations. We also have identified the spans and heights of all those bridges and culverts. The reason for that is we are looking at, and we're looking at getting information from your local conservation authorities on flood mapping. So if a flood were to happen in these areas of bridges and culverts, can the bridges and culverts take that amount of water from a drainage point of view? Will there be aspects of it that will be washed away? Are these key bridges and culverts that connect to vital areas, such as going to a route to the hospital for emergency response purposes? The road network. In terms of the road network, we're looking at both paved and unpaved roads. We're looking at who owns and which roads are by Ministry of Transportation. So that's what MTO stands for, roads classification. So Ministry of Transportation has access to service levels in terms of roads. Some of them are county roads, some of them are highways, so provincial ownership, and the ones that are owned by the township. We are looking specifically at those that are owned by the township, but we recognize the connections to those roadways that may be provincially run and mandated, and those that are maybe the Grey County run and mandated. The key to this assessment is not only what the impacts might be from a weather point of view, but also in those roads that connect, again, as I said, to vital areas for community services. Again, for example, hospitals, the fire departments, any emergency response, even connections to community centers if they are places that you need to stay in place for purposes of extreme heat wave weather or extreme snowstorms. This information we've received, again, is from the reports of the township in terms of their assets, but we're also receiving information from the conservation authorities. And we've also received geographical information systems, that's what GIS means, for in terms of their locations, the spans and heights. Whatever detail that we could get about these assets, we've received from the township, as well as some helpful information we've gotten from Grey County as well. So how we actually do the climate hazards. So this is the climate assessment review. We use PIEVC stands for the Public Infrastructural Vulnerability Engineering, I always get this wrong. Public Infrastructure Engineering Vulnerability Committee from Engineers Canada. The PIEVC protocol has been in place since 2005, has been utilized by Engineers Canada, is currently the standard being used by the federal government in terms of their work for Infrastructure Canada grant programs for assessing the risks of climate change to infrastructure across Canada. We as Wood have been using the PIEVC protocols across Canada, from BC all the way into Ontario, Quebec, and even the East Coast, looking at things from not only buildings and facilities, road networks, water treatment plants. So we're very familiar with this protocol. It has been standardized across Canada for its high standard. We run through climate interactions, and I will show you those in the next slide. We look at how the interaction is between the infrastructure component and the climate parameter. So infrastructure components can be things like the landscape, the roadways, it can be potable water, it can be water treatment, drainage. It can also include the actual physical asset of, if this is in the case of a building, the building structure, the foundation, and we also everything from windows to doors. So it's about 24 infrastructure components that we look at, including such things as, is there a backup generator? So consideration of things where if the power goes out because there's an ice storm, will there still be power to operate that community center? We are looking at 11 climate parameters. I will show you that in the next slide. We are collecting, as I said, the flood mapping of the waterways in the Georgian Bluffs from the conservation authorities, and we've had good conversations with them. We're just waiting for the data to be received to do this assessment. We're looking at the key buildings and facilities. We're looking at key infrastructure. Now, someone might ask the question of how is our process similar to the ICLEI-BARC process? So I want to sort of address that because I know that question will come up. The ICLEI-BARC process is a very high-level overview. They do a climate science report. They have discussions with people about what these risks might mean, but it's very high level. We are taking this to a level just below in terms of detail from that high level approach to examining what the actual exposure will be to these elements to get a better sense of what the risks might be, where there needs to be some upgrades made into those infrastructure, whether it's your building, your roads, to point you in the directions of here's where funding may go towards to improve the exposure and the risks of these components to climate hazards. So BARC is sort of the very overview level. We do it one level below and get into the more of the engineering components of that work. We also are looking at third-party connections. So we do consider things like the gas connections, so natural gas, propane connections, how are those services provided? Can those services get to the location by roadways? Should a roadway, let's say a roadway is very slippery with ice, let's say a roadway is flooded. We look at the electricity connections as well, so how electricity is provided to that site. For example, if there's an ice storm, the wires snap or get sagging because of extreme heat wave levels, will there be energy available still on site? And that is where we consider things like, again, how are they going? What's the repair time? But do you have at least 48 hours to have a generator running to provide energy to the site? The charts that I'm showing you is how we do the assessment. We rank it based on the probability and the likelihood. And in the next slide, you'll see a p-value. That comes from climate science. So our meteorological group does climate sciences in terms of not only what the current weather impacts are using weather data, but also projecting it into the future. So what are the likelihoods that these impacts will happen? We look at it from the likelihood that that component will impact that site. So example I might give is for a special case, we might have a tornado. If a tornado comes into your area, I would say the likelihood of the severity in terms of an impact would be a high of 5, because that is likely the tornado could take out your entire building. If not, the structure, things nearby might grab a hydroelectric pole, throw it at the building. Again, this is the way my mind thinks. We can ask questions about that, but I'm very much a high risk kind of guy based on experience. The severity is we measure by measurably ranking 1 to 5. So it's a 5x5 matrix. Severity S is 1 to 5, everything from measurable to very severe. Measurable means you can measure it, you could see it. Very severe means likely that you're going to have a destructible impact on that component. The likelihood is basically from low to very high. The highest risk number you can get is 25 using the 5x5 matrix. The second chart just explains quickly, and I know I'm talking fast, we can have questions about this later, but we look at that's how we rank the risk. You look at the severity, the probability, likelihood, multiplying it. So 1 by 5 would be 5, 5 by 5 would be 25. The risk levels are everything from negligible, so that could be 1 or 2. It could also be no risk, which is 0. And then the major risks, you have up to 25. Special cases, just pointing out, it's a 5 would be a tornado. So it may be a tornado is unlikely to happen, but if it were to happen, it'd be a high severity risk score to it, so you get a 5. The other case would be precipitation events. So although precipitation events may be frequent, the impact may be low in the beginning, but as they build up over time, if the infrastructure hasn't been used to address this, you get extreme weather events happening in which the precipitation continually pounds on, for example, a road. So if a road has a crack and it keeps growing and growing because that crack has not been filled or patched, another example could be a pothole, then you can see that pothole growing if that roadway is neglected over time. So just to get some feedback, here are the climate science hazards we've identified. We are looking at 11 components. And these are the components that our climate scientists have looked at to say these are the most likely events that will be impacting Georgian Bluffs, either from a historical point of view, but also into the near future. Freeze-thaw cycles, heat wave, So freeze thaw being, very rapidly, minimum daily temperature is greater than 0 degrees, but the minimum daily extreme. So you're going up and down in fluctuations. Your heat wave, anything above 30 degrees Celsius. That also includes humidity. So we consider that, especially in Ontario, with humididex involved in the temperature. So heat waves that you may be experiencing now, will they increase in the future? The design event precipitation, this is precipitation events, but it's from a concept of infiltration and depth and intensity. So it is not just looking at the precipitation events of an annual precipitation event from spring, fall, summer, and winter, but also looking at the actual how far will it infiltrate. And these are design events that are considered in building construction and infrastructure construction. Freezing rain, both freezing rain from if it's a wet snow to an actual ice storm itself. Drought dry periods. We're looking at basically how dry days being the moisture index will get lower and lower. And will this cause a risk of drought periods of vegetation drying with a consideration of wildfires? High winds being anything greater than 90 kilometers of wind per hour. And we've seen notably a number of those in Ontario that does happen. Thunderstorm and lightning. So thunderstorm and lightning could also include precipitation events. There could be rain. There doesn't necessarily have to be rain, but an example could be lightning striking a hydroelectric pole and taking out the transformer. And then this is where we're still collecting data and we're waiting for the Conservation Authority, but looking at the lakeshore, the river flooding, and the storm surge. So around Georgian Bay area, but also all the rivers and lakeshore areas within the township. The description is there. A copy of the presentation is given to the committee. The p-values. So just to have a note on what we're looking at, our probability of the values. The historical baseline is based on past events. We have a 20-year time frame of past events. We are looking into the future. So we're looking at a scenario of 2040, 2070, and 2100 in terms of future years. Any color that is blue means that risk or probability will decrease. So we're seeing a decrease in the freeze-thaw cycles, but anything that is red, we are definitely seeing an increase of. So you will see, we predict that there will be an increase of heat waves, there will be increased precipitation events, there will be a slight increase in freezing rain, and that occurs because it will necessarily be going towards snow, but because the temperatures will be really warming, you will have risk of some freezing rain events happening in the future. High winds will definitely be slightly increasing, and thunderstorms and lightning can be expected because of increased precipitation events. And these are the hazards that, as I said before, and I'm just going to go up back one slide just to let you know, this is where the probability comes in. Those are the p-values that we're using. We then look at them and say, what is the severity and likelihood of these impacts impacting something like the building, the roads, the culverts, to say, yes, they can withstand an impact from this, or no, they cannot. And that would be where we'd rank it from a 1 to a 5 in terms of what the impact of the risks would be and the damage. Moving forward, so that is where we're at right now. So we have been assessing the buildings and the facilities right now. We have the information regarding
Brian, pardon me for interrupting. Yeah. I wonder if we could stop here and just, would you mind if anyone had any questions at this point?
Oh, feel free. Yeah.
I'm being a little bit selfish because I do have one question.
Okay.
But I'll open it up to the committee first to see if anyone has any questions at this point. It's a lot of data to take in, and I just wanted to give everybody a little break. If I may, when we look at the historical, who's that, Linda? Okay, I'll come back to you, Linda. When you look at the historical or baseline data, I'm a little surprised that we're looking 30 or 40 years back to 1981 in the past. And so when I look at something like heat wave and it's rated as a p-value of 1, I'm surprised at that, because I think even if we looked at the last 5 years as a baseline, it might be a little higher than that. So I wonder if you could explain for us why we would go back so far as a baseline. I always think of baseline as being kind of right now. Is that something you can answer for us?
Yes, so through you, Madam Chair. So the reason we are looking at that background is we're looking at weather stations and the availability of the data on that. So we actually look at the local weather stations, and we do actually go back past the 1980s. But the reason is a lot of climate projections, especially when it comes to weather perspectives, are projecting from a past scenario. And it is a question of the quality of the data that we get from some of those meteorological stations. So I'm probably not the best to answer the full component on this one. And this is where I'm saying our climate meteorological folks kind of do this aspect for us. But they actually do a QA/QC on the climate weather data to say, does this actually match or not? But this is also why we have these conversations with you to say, is there something we've missed? Because a lot of people being in the local community, you've probably experienced more weather impacts than we do. And so we need to get that feedback to say, does that make sense or not? Should we be raising that value or not? Because we have what we have in terms of the quantitative data, but there are some qualitative values that we need to consider in terms of that probability.
Gotcha. I mean, I think something like heat waves would have to be fairly quantitative, because we do have sort of simple ways of measuring that 30-degree or above. I just, for me, especially over the past few days, I just question that as a baseline as being at a 1. But I do understand that you're going back further in time. So thank you. And I'm just straining to see who has questions. Luke and Linda. So we'll go to Luke and then Linda. Thank you.
No, it's just Luke.
Okay, so it is Luke. Go ahead, Luke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thanks, Brian, for the update. That's very nice. 3 questions with regards to the risk assessment. One is there a way, so you do a likelihood, probability of obviously the impact. Is there any kind of measurement other than in financial terms? Or is financial the only lens through which we review impacts? I'm just thinking about mortality or kind of health-related issues or psychological things or other ways by which we can assess impacts. That would be the first question. The second question is, if you have these different prognoses, I understand you still need to do the risk assessment, right? In terms of, what are your hazards versus what is the mitigation that is actually in place already in terms of culverts and the status of roads and things like that. Are you going to provide different risk assessments? So one against 2030, one against 2040, et cetera, et cetera? That will be the second question. And then the third one, I lost my train of thought, but these will be these 2 questions.
Thank you.
Excellent. Through you, Madam Chair, excellent questions, Luke. So the first question, I've already gone blank on the first question, sorry. Let me go to the second question. Yes, so the reason we show you 2040, 2070, and 2000 is those are the years that we don't do it just sort of across what's currently happening. We look at those projections and we use the PI-VC protocol to look at likelihood severity over those timeframes. So each one will be done individually. We don't do it as a combined result. When we present the results, we may show them combined, but we've been doing this with clients in the federal government where we actually are doing bar charts as to here's the likelihood of what the impacts are going to look like as the risk moves over time. I hope that answers that first question. The second question to you, Luke, is yes. So what you're not seeing is I do assess things like health and safety. I do have a lens on that, as well as the operations for these components of it, to look at it going from yes, traditionally in terms of asset management, you'll find this by financial numbers, but there is a consideration, and this is why we look at things like the third-party connections and the connections to places like hospitals. So if I'm looking at a roadway and there's a hospital connected and there may be some culverts, the risk of you cannot get people to that hospital because they cannot be able to get there because of a freeze event. Let's say there's a heat wave that buckles the thing. There's a flooding event that takes out the culverts. Are there alternative routes? So this is what we've been looking at from an emergency preparedness kind of response as well, to say, well, what happens if these infrastructural assets break down in extreme weather events? So we're not looking just at the gradual implementation. We're also considering what's the likelihood of you have a very quick impact that comes through. So, for example, you have an extreme heat wave that happens more than 3 days. Let's say we have a heat wave for a week. What's that going to look like? So this is where I get into from a health and safety perspective. I do, because I have a background in working with Health Canada on climate risks components. I've added this component into the PIVC protocol that looks at that values and says, what is the likelihood of a heat wave? What are the things you need to consider? And for one of them, for me, is heat exhaustion. What's that going to look like for not just the people on the site, but any visitors that might be in that area that might be impacted. If you're traveling on the roadway and the asphalt is getting hot and warm, what's the likelihood that you maybe have, and it may be minimal, but my head kind of works on high risk scenarios of what's the likelihood that the tires on the vehicle start getting melting, you have a vehicle accident, and now we need to get the response out there because you've had a vehicle accident and someone's hurt.
Okay, yeah, and just the reason why I asked is we organized a meeting, a session a few months ago with an insurance person who looked at the impact from climate change on the insurance industry and house rates and insurance rates and all that. And what struck me was that they did extensive scientific research on the psychological impact, for example, of flooding. Not only how housing, nobody wants to buy a house in that neighborhood because housing were, developments in the wrong spots, basically, but also the really kind of traumatic experiences that people went through when they were dealing with sometimes 2 floods in 5 years or something like that. And it's just a different way of, I'm just thinking about public perceptions. If you put it in financial terms, it probably makes it much easier for people to say, well, that's not my responsibility. That's a little bit, far away. But if you make it really kind of like, this actually could happen to me, and boy, it's going to have an impact in my life, then I'm just thinking from an engagement perspective, it would be another lens by which we can raise attention to what the severity of these risks could actually look like.
Okay, Luke, I imagine that answers your questions about the scope of risk. Are you able to come back to your third question, or do you want me to come back to you later, Luke?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Anne.
Yes, thank you, through Madam Chair. 2 comments, and I'm going to comment as well on the baseline time frame, because I think going back to 81 and not projecting to at least 2020 loses some of the changes that are currently happening. And the other comment is in terms of your timelines going from baseline right to 2040, I think it becomes really easy for people to again say, oh, that's far away, I'm not going to worry about it. So I would really like to see the projections being a bit smaller in terms of timelines, so that urgency is there.
Is that something that can be done?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Anne, we can certainly have a look at that. We pretty much will show this. These are sort of the standard that PIVC requires us to look at. And the federal government has told us that these are the standard years that they want to look at. When we do projections, we can get closer. These are just sort of like what 2040 would look like, but I can work with our climate meteorological people to get a bit more closer to 2030, if that works.
How does that sound, Anne?
Yeah, I think that's good. I do still worry about that baseline of 1881 to 2010. I mean, we're now in 2022. We know that the last 21 years have looked a whole lot different than the 21 years before that. So I worry about kind of that baseline choice.
Any comments further to that? And I do see our CAO's hand up as well, so we'll go to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the feedback on the comments, folks. I think if you can leave that with our wood consultants and our staff team to take away, I think it is that fine balance between looking at sort of unique timelines versus industry standard timelines and how we compare to others as well. So if you can leave that with us. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. Is your hand still up, Anne? Did you have more?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. I think we're good for questions at this point. So if you would like to carry on, Mr. Montgomery.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone, for the good questions. And those were the good questions because I think we're going to have a bit of a discussion when I show you the results of the greenhouse gas mitigation inventory work. So just a reminder, what has been retained to look at the corporate emissions from the township. What I'm showing you is the breakdown using the greenhouse gas inventory work for reduction of greenhouse gases that I was working on this component. This is the corporate emissions. So 2018 was the decided base year in terms of not only the data availability, but as of 2018, the township has been reporting to the province their energy usage. The good news is you can clearly see that there have been reductions, and there have been significant reductions occurring over this 4-year time period. The original total of the 2018, and this is carbon dioxide equivalents. So I'm looking at carbon dioxide, as well as methane, as well as nitrogen oxides. The number of tonnage of carbon equivalents, 436 tons in 2018. That is the base number. As of 2021, we have a reduction to 2,227 tons of carbon equivalents. So the township has made some significant progress over those 4 years of emission reductions. If we look at the energy sources, we break this down, again, in 2018, we've seen a significant reduction as well, and that is driving a number of these emission reductions for greenhouse gas. The significant piece to note is the township switched fuel. And I believe Linda from Grey County mentioned fuel switching from the nasty fuel oil 1 and 2, which is a derivative of diesel used for heating purposes, to visually eliminating it and switching over to electricity and natural gas. You'll also see propane is slowly decreasing as well over time. Propane is associated more with the usage of the ice surfacing of the arenas. My caveat with this right now is we have gone through 2 years of the pandemic. So some of this may be being driven by the usage of some of those community centers not being as highly used as they were in the past. But when I do the emissions profile, greenhouse gas emissions, I look at this from an absolute value. An absolute value is the number without considering influences of weather changes. So you may have had more salting of roads one winter versus another. You may have also had, again, a pandemic being involved. I'm not including that in terms. We're looking at the absolute numbers regardless of these influences. But we do recognize that those influences could be playing a role in the reduction. In terms of the emissions profile, I looked at the corporate buildings, I looked at water treatment plants, the vehicle fleet. So the vehicle fleet is all the vehicles that the township runs and operates. I separated vehicle fleet from plows. Plows tend to be more diesel, larger vehicles, therefore they will have higher emissions, but because they're also only being used seasonally. Waste would be any waste that's being collected in the township itself, going to the landfill. In this case, waste is considered in terms of the data to be in the community profile because it is a combined waste collection system. And then wastewater is any emissions associated with wastewater treatment, energy, methane emissions. And energy source, as you see, electricity is pretty standardized. Natural gas is pretty standardized. Diesel is pretty standardized in terms of the key sources of emissions still by energy source by the corporation. But reductions have significantly been made. The reason I'm showing you this profile is this is the results of what we've had for the 4 years. So the township now knows where they were in 2018 and where we are now in 2021. The key discussion, and I want to take back with you, is now getting into, so that was milestone 1 of your PCP process of creating the inventory. PCP 2, we move into corporate targets and forecasting of emissions.
I wonder if I could interrupt you right there. Yep. So just looking at the graphs of corporate emissions from 2018 to 21, I haven't heard you mention the airport in all of this, which was in part at least a facility that we owned and operated up until earlier this year. So is that included in this data as well?
Through you, Madam Chair, excellent question. Yes, it is. So you have been reporting on the energy usage of the airport from 2018 till 2021. So I have included the airport in the energy usage and the GHG emissions profile. And that airport is under corporate buildings.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for that interruption. Oh, I'm sorry.
Through you, Madam Chair, I was just going to tag on to that. So we would see the disposition of the airport coming off our books starting this year. But we have to remember that that will now be a community facility.
Yeah, it's kind of a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other when we look at it overall, for sure. Right. Okay, and Member Carlton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment then, what about the fuel sales at the airport that would be used by planes coming in and out? Where does that get tracked? Does that go on Georgian Bluffs or is that somewhere else?
Excellent question through you, Madam Chair. So the fuel usage at the airport goes in for sorry, I lose my voice, for airplanes and flying in and out. So that is that's actually considered in the community emissions because it's the community use of the airport.
Thank you. So you did mention the impacts also of COVID over the last couple of years of this particular graph. Do you anticipate much of a change in those as we hopefully move out of a pandemic, a situation where the pandemic's affecting usage of, for example, some of our facilities?
Through you, Madam Chair, so that is something we need to consider when we're looking at the forecasts of targets. Because you've had a couple of years where usage may have been down, that may, if the usage increases, but the energy hasn't increases with the usage of it, and there hasn't been more energy switches or energy efficiencies done at some of those community centers, then yes, there will be an increase. There may be an increase seen. But without seeing that data and reported data, I can speculate that there may be an increase.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. And I don't see any other questions at this time.
So Partnerships for Climate Change Protection Milestone 2 recognizes that there needs to be a target and forecast on projections at least on the corporate side. So the first first table, is your GHG numbers over the last 2018 years. So moving from an actual picture graph to these were the values and the reductions that we're seeing. So from 2018 to 2019, we saw a 32% reduction. And all the way to 2021, we are currently at a 49% reduction. That is a significant reduction. And as I said before, a lot of that has been resulted in more efficiencies, fuel switching, but there may also be the pandemic at play for at least that 1 year between 2020 and 2021. The emission targets and forecasting. I looked at the Grey County, so it's good that Linda's here because she can probably confirm if I've got those numbers correct or not. I looked at Grey County's corporate targets. I forecasted energy growth, so there's a percentage looking at energy growth over that time, looking at the Ministry of Energy. I looked at Ontario's and Canada's targets, as well as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the international targets that they suggest for 2030, 2040, and 2050. Scenarios, and this is where you will see a graph in the next chart, which is we look at you have done nothing. So it's called business as usual, BAU. I always call it the nasty one because it assumes that no action is ever done and assumes that anything from a 2018 in terms of your baseline basically just keeps increasing because no one actually considered improvements or anything, and energy just keeps getting wasted. That's always a fun one to do a scenario on. Everyone loves it because it just looks like no one's done anything, and that's what that scenario is. The other scenarios are actions that are taken with other government level. So taking action with your local Grey County, taking actions with the federal government, Ontario actions. So typing into those things that are happening at the community, but also with other government levels and other municipalities. So the question is, right now, is I proposed looking at the reduction targets from internationally to Grey counties, and that's from a corporate point of view. We're not looking at community. I proposed some suggested reduction targets. And the question is, and I know that Grey County has brought this up, do we want to aim for net zero by 2050 or sooner? Right now, I'm proposing in 2030 a 40% reduction. And the only reason I'm suggesting that is because between 2020 and 2021, there may have been, because of the usage of some of these facilities weren't as active as they have been in the past. It may be that numbers bump up in 2022 or 2023. 2040, I've suggested sort of a 65% reduction. It's in between the Ontario and the international and Grey County one, largely because from a projectional point of view, I definitely can make some recommendations into 2030. Getting into 2040 might be a bit risky in terms of some of the recommendation actions because technology will change very quickly and rapidly. Certainly electric vehicles are going to be much more available in 2040, if not by 2030. It is a question of the adoption of that technology. So for example, the township would not easily be able to switch over to electric vehicle plows at this moment. Does not say it might not be available, but right now, mostly anything that would be a electric vehicle truck is now finally coming slowly into the market. So there may be some opportunities on that one. Green building development standards may be coming into play. Again, it is the uptake. And then always in 2050, the net zero, if Grey County is going for net zero, I always say, yeah, net zero could be a 100% reduction. It could also be 90% reduction and looking at offsets to complete the 10%. But that is why I'm suggesting 90, because that'll be at least in line with everybody else from a 2050. So you will be in line with the targets that everybody at the international level has suggested and called for. It is a question of how more aggressive do you want to do this? And then my perspective as someone who's done target setting and talking to Linda, the Grey County, in terms of what actions can be taken sooner rather than later in terms of meeting your nearest targets versus your long-term targets.
Okay, thank you. I just see at least one hand up, so I'll turn it over to CAO Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think just to be fair to the committee, you've received a lot of information, a lot of calculations, and I think just talking about the role of the committee as well is we're really looking to our advisory committee to reinforce or endorse maybe make suggestions moving forward. Ultimately, our program or our plan will be presented to council, and it will then be adopted and endorsed. I would also look at this kind of a plan much the same as we might a master plan or an official plan where we should be reviewing it. One of the milestones is regular monitoring and reviewing. So I don't know that it's critical that we get it perfect. I think what we want to do is set realistic but achievable, and I think we're all here to meet those targets, but I just don't want the committee agonizing too much on whether something should be 90% or 95%. I think there will be opportunity to continue reviewing, and really until we flesh out some of the actual action items, we may not know what that percentage might be. So I just thought, Madam Chair, just put that context out for the committee as well.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Right, you feel free to continue on.
All right, so I only have 2 slides left for everybody. This is how you graph projected forecasted greenhouse gas emissions. It's not fancy. like what Linda from Grey County has shown you, largely because we need to break into the actual recommendations. So you'll see a much more fancier graph that breaks down the recommendations of actions for the township corporately and what those reductions might look like. So very much, well, right now, this is a very simple graph that we present to the Partnership for Climate Change Protection in the report, just to say, this is how we've done the forecasting. This is the black dotted line that I called the business as usual line. That is just basically assumed that if no action was undertaken in 2018, obviously your greenhouse gas emissions are increasing over time. So is this because of the energy demand, the choices of energy. It just basically assumes that even the federal and provincial government have never taken action. So I always laugh at that one to go, this is your worst case scenario. Your best case scenarios, the green dotted line, this is just me just charting where the suggested reduction targets might be. So you might note that in 2040, we're slightly lower than the federal and the provincial government. And then we might be a little higher in the 2050, 2040 year itself. But eventually you will get to net zero. So this is just kind of a visual of this target table. Final slide, and this will be of interest to you. This is, and so I put my caveat on this one, this is out of the scope of what we've been asked as would, but being someone that has done greenhouse gas inventory emissions, I thought it would be useful for you as a committee to at least get a snapshot of what your community emissions profile looks like from 2018. And this will help hopefully look at your work in terms of the consideration of doing a community action plan. This is a quick snapshot. Providing this as for discussion purposes. The methodology behind this is looked at the Grey County. So as Linda had mentioned, she probably was giving you a pie chart over many times. I took the Grey County Climate Change Action Plan and downscaled it to the Georgian Bluffs community. So this is a snapshot of a time period of looking at what the emissions estimated are looking like for in your community. Having some discussions with CEO Cynthia and John, I also included, this is new, the agricultural component. This is livestock and manure management, again, based on Grey County. Same methodology that ICLEI has used for the Grey County action plan. I simply downscaled comparable numbers of the how many farms, what types of livestock we have from cows all the way to emus. Residential buildings, the number of buildings, the number of commercial buildings. But this should give you hopefully a sense of where your largest emissions look like in your community and things that your committee can consider in terms of what areas you might want to address in terms of community actions. And I will leave that as the last slide for the presentation.
Thank you very much. There's a lot to take in here for sure. I think it's probably best at this time to turn it over to the committee to see if there are any questions or comments for our speaker today. I'll go to John first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Brian, thank you for that presentation. A lot of information. We'll have to be digesting that. My question is, when I went back after our meeting last week and I looked at the RFP for this work, and in terms of project deliverables, the very first one was to quantify corporate and community GHG emissions to create a baseline inventory for forecasts. The RFP also stipulates that you would be working closely with our climate action coordinator, who we no longer have. So my question is, how have you been able to manage that, or how will you manage that as we go forward in terms of meeting this first objective, which is to come up with this comprehensive corporate and community?
Certainly. So through you, Madam Chair, to John. So the way we've sort of managed this has been, what you're looking at right now is the results of those GHG inventories for the township and the community emissions component, right? So this has been downscaled. My understanding is right now is I'm still working with township staff in terms of the RFP for those pieces of it. I know you do not have a climate change corridor currently, but my understanding is one will be coming forward soon. And so at this point in time, what I've managed to do while we've been sort of waiting and making those connections is the data has been available. I have done the sort of the inventory work on this one. So we're now actually at that stage of so what do forecasts look like? What makes reasonable sense? What is in line with working with the Grey County Climate Change Action Plan on those components to say, this is what your emissions profile will look like. And then in terms of the actions right now is I can make recommendations for some community actions, but largely because the work has been around the actual corporate side of stuff like that. That is the component that I need to have some discussions around with to say what will this look like. My understanding what is the work has been the corporate side of stuff, with the interest of that would be the starting point into the discussions around should there be what would a community action plan would look like, but the corporate would be the test ground for those components.
Thank you. And then do you have a timeline for this when we might see this first draft report?
Certainly. So that might actually get into my mystery other slide, which is the timelines. So we are a bit behind on our timelines. We were looking to get something to you guys by this month of July. We are looking to get something at least by August, September. So we are actually trying to finish off so for me on the mitigation side of stuff, essentially I've shown you what we've completed. The risk side still needs to be done because the climate change draft report needs to look at components from a risk point of view and a mitigation point of view. So if I provided an example, one of the examples I tell people is if I were to propose recommendations of electric vehicles, you will require also electric vehicle charging stations. If you are situating an electric vehicle charging station, I would definitely not put it in an area that's been known to flood, because the risk to that charging station is, first and foremost, the electricity won't get there. You could get an electrical shock. You won't even have access to that electric vehicle charging station. I may make some things also about the electric vehicles, if that is one of the recommendations. Looking at it from a green fleet perspective, where those vehicles are stored on site. Again, looking at some of the road shops, if there is a risk of those road shops collapsing because of high winds and all, I may just say you may want to consider getting a bit more windproofing is not the actual technical term to it, but you maybe want to make it look at the building as from more of a wind resistancy from such things as hurricane winds, so that the building isn't collapsing on vehicles in there, including your electric vehicle fleet. But yes, we are proposing, at least at this point in time, to get you a draft report, if not by August, early September.
Okay, thank you. And John, do you have a follow-up question or two?
Just one quick comment. It looks like the number on the slide was around 19,700 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. And that number just kind of jumps out to me because I did work with the county when they were going through and developing their GHGs and Caitlin Roger from ICLEI. And the number that they pretty much rested on is that the average per capita emissions was 8.1 tons per person. And if we use the 2016 census data for the township, that means we would be producing on the order of 85,000 tons in the corporate and community sector. So if you add your 19 to your 4, for example, we come in way low. And I don't know that you can answer that right today, because I understand this is a preliminary estimate, but I think that's something we have to work towards and we have to find a reconciliation with.
Does that make sense, or can I think we're getting at, perhaps, John, if I may, that there seems to be a bit of a discrepancy in the per capita figure, and I guess some of us are wondering why that might be. Like, why is Grey County coming out at an 8.1 tons per capita, whereas this assessment lands us around 1.8, which seems sorry.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, the best way I can answer that, And I'm sure if Linda's still here, because it's something we can talk about. So my understanding with the Grey County approach is the reason is because you have all the townships and municipalities in there, right? So there hasn't been a downscaling to looking at actual hard data points, looking at this going from what is going on in each respective township. So understandably, the township of Georgian Bluffs right now, this is the first time this has been attempted. From a downscaling point of view, and you are the first town municipality in the Grey County that I understand that is doing a GHG inventory for your specific township. So there may be a bit of discrepancies between the broad overview of per population for a total area versus your population usages in the township. So I'm recognizing the discrepancy on this one to say that is why I'm saying this is a snapshot for discussion purposes only. But this is a discussion that Linda and I will need to talk about in terms of moving forward to make sure that we're both on par with what your specific Georgian Bluffs per capita is versus the overall Grey County. So I want to make sure that we do match up, because actions that do take place in the community need to support Grey County's actions as well in terms of greenhouse gas reductions.
Thank you, and I apologize. I may have muddied the waters in jumping from the 19,700 tons, the emissions overall, to the per capita. So I'm going to go back to John. Would you like to make a comment further on that?
Just following up on that, Brian. From the number you presented last week, it was a bit lower than this one, but it did kind of jump out to me. So the per capita is still pretty low, and you know, I've got a table I've been developing. I've got 19 municipalities in there from Ontario, and you know, they range from the biggest, Toronto, to one of the smallest at 2,500 people in Georgian Bay, and the average per capita emission is 7.4 tons per person, so a bit lower than what the Grey County is estimated. But then we do have a big agricultural sector here, so that, you know, we recognize that. But your number still comes in quite low, especially if you're using the same methodology, because I worked with Linda when she came on, and before that Hiba and Caitlin Roger, and so I have some familiarity with the methodology. So we need to reconcile if this is our number in the township, why it's so low.
Any comment about that, or what's the plan to, like? Oh, sorry, I'm going to go to our CAO. When I wear my reading glasses, I have a hard time seeing beyond the length of my arm. So I am sorry, Cynthia, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think good observations, good comments. And so next steps would be for us to take this offline and work with Linda and John. Happy to see the tables that you've got. I do, you know, tagging on to Brian's comments, if you're comparing us to a municipality with a transit system or large industries, there are going to be differences. So, but I think what we're hearing clearly is let's verify our numbers and make sure we know where we are. I do want to clarify one point. I've heard bringing on a new staff member dedicated as the climate change coordinator. That's not the case. We are bringing on a person to lead our community services area who will provide some leadership to this group. So I just want to make sure that I'm clarifying expectations here.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you. I also misunderstood that. So we've seen the timeline then pushed back a little bit. We're still fairly certain we'll get a report back then by the end of the summer, beginning of fall. Is that correct, Brian?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments from the committee members? Any hands up there that I can't see, Carly? No. Good. Okay, does that conclude your presentation then, Brian?
It does, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much for coming in and giving us the preliminary numbers and data. It's fantastic to see a lot of this being quantified, and a look at where we might have some targeted action in the future. So thank you very, very much for being here, and I imagine we'll be hearing lots from you later on as well.
Good to see everybody again. Thank you, Madam Chair. I might stay around for a couple minutes because I always like to see what you guys talk about, so it helps me think about other things that we need to incorporate into the draft plan.
Excellent. Thank you. And Cynthia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we just need Brian to stop sharing his screen, and then we can get back to our committee view. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Excellent. So moving on then with the agenda. No correspondence or staff reports. There's been a request for an update on GB Goes Green. Is now a good time, Brittany, for you to give us an update?
Sure, I can give that now. Apologies, everyone. I'm a little under the weather, so I know I'm not looking very committee ready. As far as GB Goes Green goes, we have created some postcards that are now available at the township office. So we would encourage all of you to come in and grab a bundle, and then we can start circulating the word more aggressively. I have connected with Jenny, who you'll recall helped get the GB Goes Green initiative up and running. I did attend and I'm going to get the name wrong, but the community climate action group within George and Blessed. I connected with them in June, and they have been very gracious in offering to help in getting the Green Talks up and running, and have selected different topics to get that initiative up and running. So I thank them for that. I have asked Jenny for an update regarding how many households have completed the survey. I haven't heard back yet, but when I do, I will update the group by email, and then we can start updating our greenometer as well. So as far as an update goes, that's all I have for the committee at this point.
Thank you, Brittany. Any questions for Britt at this time? Doesn't look as though. Brittany, thank you, and feel better. You sound like you just need to go rest and take it easy. Thank you for being here. Any questions then from the public? Item number 9, I'm not aware of any. Carly, no. The work plan, I believe we have agreed to table that one for next time. Is that correct? When we have a little more information, and that will give folks a little more time to review it and have some feedback for us at the next committee meeting. So we'll defer that. I have nothing under unfinished business, no new business. Anyone wish to provide notice of motion at this time? Seeing none, we have no closed session. And then the last item is just to talk about our next regular meeting, which is slated to happen on August 18th. Some of us have been chatting a bit about that. I know that's not a date that I can make. I will be on Manitoulin, where there will likely not be any connectivity. And it has been suggested that we take that month off, as is fairly customary for committees and council work to take a bit of a summer break for all of us, but for staff as well. So I'm wondering how the committee members feel about that. Is that agreeable with everyone? Yep. Okay. All right. Do we need a motion, Carly, to no? Okay. So we will table that one, we'll cancel that meeting, and the next regular meeting then will be in September 15th, 10 a.m. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you to both of our guest speakers. That was really helpful information, and it's encouraging that we're moving along in some concrete ways. Thank you to staff for guiding us along the way. And I just need now a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Danuta. All in favor? Thank you very much, and we're adjourned. Take care, everybody.